Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Sunday, March 6th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The spring game is in 41 days, the Notre Dame game in 181 days, the game against Michigan in 261 days. The spring football practice kicks off Tuesday at Ohio State. We will finish our spring positional preview series with Kevin Noon on the quarterbacks on tomorrow's show, but today I wanted to talk a little bit about what actually happens at a spring football practice and why you can learn a lot by being there and watching. So my guest today is someone I've watched a whole bunch of spring football with over the years, Tony Gerdeman. Tony, thanks for being here.
Tom, it's a privilege and an honor, as always, to be on the show with you here today.
So, we have watched a lot of Ohio State football practices and games and hotel walk-ins over the years, but, spring football is very different in a lot of ways from pretty much all the other stuff. I mean, we don't get to watch a lot of practice in the fall. And, what we do get to watch in fall camp is generally much more limited than in the spring. You get a lot more chances to watch in the spring than any other time of year. So, this is also kind of a very different time because there's a lot of experimentation with guys. You'll see guys trying out different positions where you're like, never see them again. You see a guy at day one of spring practice, like, what's this mean? And it may mean nothing. But, the start of spring ball to me is always a very informative time, that first practice, because just basic things like the order that guys are repping in. I feel like that tells you a lot about where the coaching staff thinks things maybe stand right now at each different position group.
Yeah, it's your first avalanche of information about that year's team, and that's why it's fun being there because you spend the offseason wondering about all of these things, and not that you get every answer in the spring, but you get a whole bunch of answers to some of your questions about where guys are. Like you said, what order are they repping in? What position are they repping at? Oh, this corner, say, Legend Cavazos is now at safety. These are the things that kind of come out at that point, and then to just be there and see it all with your own eyes and put stuff in the back of your mind that will come out later on, or, just to be there to experience it. And it's just this glut of, there's just, like I said, an avalanche of information that gives you so much of what you're wondering about and then allows you to apply it down the road. And it's just fun because last season is over. Now it's this year's team. People want to know about this year's team. And so do we, because, we don't cover this without having an interest in finding out these answers. And so, to have a lot of those answers, and then it's your first look at everything, and it's fun to see like what pops up, who stands out, like who just blows up. It was like 2019, it was our first opportunity to see what Justin Fields could do and how much different he was than everybody else. It's stuff like that, and we've talked about on this show in the Buckeye Weekly podcast about the first time you see Garrett Wilson, the first time you see Jackson Smith-Njigba. The first time you see a star, that happens that first spring practice a lot of times.
Fields was an issue. We talked a bunch about the Jackson Smith-Njigba and Garrett Wilson stories on a Buckeye Weekly episode that aired just last week, so you can find that in the Buckeye Weekly feed. But the Fields story is interesting because that was one where you sort of heard like, hey, this kid's like different. This kid is a completely unique prospect, totally different than anyone else they have. And it's, like sometimes you hear that and the kid doesn't pan out and it's like, it's fine. And sometimes it looks totally different. And I remember the first Justin Fields practice we watched, spring of 2019, it was him and Matthew Baldwin and who else was there at the time? Chris Chuganoff, I think. And we're watching from way across the indoor field. And all you had to do was watch the arc of the throws of those three guys. It was like there was Fields, and the ball never, they're throwing a 30-yard out. And the ball, when Fields threw it, never went above the top of the scoreboard on the wall behind him. And then all the other guys, it was kind of like this arc. And it was like, you want to see arm strength? That's what arm strength looks like from across the field. And it was just like, okay, like there is no competition on that front. And, and then you can sort of get a judge for accuracy. Are they hitting these guys in stride? And it took a little while for him to get up to speed on that one. But when he did, it was just kind of like, there was sort of this idea like, well, maybe someone else will. No. That quarterback with Derby was over for me about practice 2 or 3 of the spring, if there ever was one to begin with. So something you mentioned earlier was seeing guys trying out at different spots. Corners will be repping with the safeties. You might have a tackle at guard, a guard at center. And then Whether you see that again later in the spring or not, that tells you, I think, a lot about where things stand with those individual players and also those position groups.
Yeah, because if it could be that player does not necessarily have a home, say at tackle, so you're trying him at guard because he's third or fourth or fifth on the depth chart at one position. So you're trying to find that best home for that player. Or it could mean, oh boy, these guys are if he's the number 5 tackle and the number 2 guard, something like that, then there's an issue at that position and the coaches have some concerns. Or maybe somebody's missing because they have a class or something like that. That's the other, the non-fun part about any kind of practice, spring or otherwise, when guys are missing. And it could be for class, it could be for an injury, it could be for a cramp or just something that they're just off riding a bike inside somewhere. And so that's some of the difficulty in trying to put all of the information together. That's why it's not every answer, but it's a lot of answers, and it's all good information because it allows you to take it in. But yeah, when guys are missing, that's tough. But and it is not the end all be all in terms of, oh, he was at corner today, so that's where he's going to be. But like I said, like Tom said, it gives you an idea that they're trying to find a home or there's some issues at another position. So that's also really good insight into where the coaching is and where the concerns are. And then as you go to the next practice, if there's somebody else there or, there's some other things going on, it's like, okay, now there is a real issue because they're rolling guys through trying to figure something out, or they've got a bunch of guys that they're not sure about, and so they're trying them at other positions. So then those are some of the guys that you watch that maybe hit the transfer portal in May, something like that, where if they keep getting bounced around looking for a position, it's because they don't have one.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the first practice of the spring is we walk in there, you walk in with kind of an open, a blank sheet of paper, more or less, and you don't know quite what to expect, and you feel like you learn a lot, and then you walk out and it's like, well, what does this all mean? And you kind of need to, it's kind of like measuring your kids. Like if you, dear listener at home, measure your kids, like, hey, you have the mark on the door jamb with how tall your kid is at a certain time. It's like, you can measure your kid. And then if you have a mark 6 months earlier, that tells you a lot about how much they've changed. It just, this data point now tells me this is how tall they are now. But if I have something from 6 months a year ago and they've grown 3 inches, well, that tells me something very, very different entirely, not just how tall they are, but how much they've grown. That's sort of what the first practice is. The first practice is that first mark. This is where things are starting. Then 5 practices from now, 10 practices from now, at the spring game, 15 practices from now, when I see where the mark is at that point, where guys stand, that tells me a lot more about how things have changed, the direction that things are going with certain guys at certain position groups and all that. So, for example, a guy who's repping 7th with the defensive ends at practice 1, who is then repping 4th at the end of the spring, well, that tells me a lot. That tells me this is a guy who's going to make an impact this fall. I mean, that's one of the things that maybe is the most instructive to me, because coaches can say lots of stuff, and you get lots of happy talk from coaches about how everyone's doing great and we're all working and it's wonderful and we're so happy to be back there. But that's the stuff where beyond the happy talk, that's the stuff where I feel like you really it seems like a very basic thing, but that's where you really get some insight into what's happening.
Yeah, and one of the tough things is trying to keep up with everything going on. It's impossible, and especially when it's an outdoor practice. The first practice of spring is usually inside the woody because of the weather, and it's usually like too cold or too rainy. But when you're in there and like it's just this wash of information, and you're trying to get all of it, and it's very difficult. You're writing down as much of a depth chart as you can. And if you don't see enough of practice to where there actually is any kind of depth chart, then it's even more difficult. But when you're there for an entire practice, the amount of information that you're trying to keep, sometimes we'll like split offense and defense just because it's easier to focus on one, because it's like, I think you mentioned it in the previous Buckeye Weekly last week or earlier this week. It's the I Love Lucy episode of the chocolate on the conveyor belt. Like, it's just all coming at you, and you're like, you're trying to jot all this down, and then we'll like meet up and say, did you see this guy, Court Williams here with the twos? Did you see this? And it's like, yeah, okay, we got that. And you're trying to piece all of this together. And then we get like a 30-minute window of video and photos. And then afterwards you're like trying to, and Ross will get involved as well, like texting like, hey, did you see here this with this? And you're watching the video. It's the Zapruder, breakdown of everything going on. And so you try to put all of this information. And then, like you said, Tom, how does that then apply to practice number 7 that we may get a look at? And it's endlessly fascinating, and it's just a spring practice. It's like, well, who cares? And it's like, no, there's just it's the start of covering the team. It's the start of knowing and learning and finding out about this team and telling the stories about this team. And it's like the first chapter of the season. So, I mean, it's incredibly important.
And, I guess we've sort of talked around a little bit, like what it's like to be there. And you've talked about all the different stuff that's happening. But let's just say practice number 1, it's on the indoor field. We're standing in there. We're on the sidelines on the indoor of the indoor field. What, the first 30 minutes, they is open for photography a lot of times. And then sometimes we'll get to stay for what good friend Jerry Emig will call bonus coverage. And we get to stick around and watch, even if we can't shoot photos, we can stick around and watch more, and you learn a lot there if you get to stick around. So when you're in there, what are you seeing? What are they doing for that first, the before practice? What are they doing for the first couple periods of practice? And then what do you get to see as the practice goes along? And how is the field sort of divided up?
Yeah, boy, I'm just picturing myself in the WHAC now. It's always starts out with some stretching and some jogging. And then I don't even know if they start out with any special teams the first day of spring, because I feel like there's a lot of individual.
Yeah, they'll have punt sometimes. They'll run punt or punt block or punt return, something like that. The first period of practice sometimes. Yeah.
But then when they get into individual drills, like I think you usually got like the defensive line off to the right, and the quarterbacks are kind of against the far wall, and you're in there with, I don't know, 50 other media members or so, and onlookers, and sometimes parents are in there, or high school coaches, or just looky-loos, if you will, Tom. But you're in there and you're trying to find a viewing window, like you're standing on the sideline. You're trying not to be behind anybody so that you can see everything, and and you're watching. Obviously, you want to see the quarterbacks because that's there's interest there. But also, when there's positions of concern, you want to find those positions and and see what order guys are repping in. And so you're standing there, and like I said, there's just a line of people watching. So I'll try to find a spot where I have a good vantage point, but I'm also kind of isolated by myself without being too far away. That way I could see far down the field and I could see what's going on right in front of me. And a lot of times, if there's something physical going on in front of you, you'll want to check it out. Although for spring, there's really not. But I think what is the most fun is usually the one-on-ones with the receivers and the corners. And then you also get a very good look at what the quarterbacks can do. And they do quite a bit of that. And so that's always fun when they break into that. But yeah, it's you're on the sideline, you're trying to find a good viewing spot, and then you've got to move around because you are trying to gather. You don't want to just stay there and watch the linebackers all day. You want to. You got to almost figure like you need information on every single position on this team. And so you watch quarterbacks for a little bit, then you go watch the receivers, the running backs, and it's really difficult to get all of that in there. That's why it's better to kind of sometimes split offense and defense. Mm-hmm. But also it's very difficult to not also want to, like, if you take offense and I take defense, it's really difficult for me to not want to get a look at what's going on offensively as well, because I would like to have the information myself. I would like to see it with my own eyes. No offense to you, but like, I'm here. I would like to spend some time looking at that. But really, if you've got 30 minutes, like you're just grabbing, it's the being in the box with the spinning money, in the air. You're grabbing what you can, And then if you're just focused on your side of the ball, you can do better. And then that creates a better picture for the readers, for the viewers, for the listeners later on once we regurgitate it to everybody. But yeah, I enjoy it. It's just being around a bunch of people watching the first. It's this rejuvenation, this rebirth of Ohio State football, and it's your first look at it. And it's like that episode from Jurassic Park, Tom, when they're on the Jurassic Park ride, learning about the how the DNA was created, and the dinosaurs coming out of the eggshell, out of the egg, and you're seeing this new dinosaur, basically, Tom, being born every year.
Ohio State football 2022, basically a new dinosaur.
Yes.
That should be. You're welcome, Ohio State marketing department. Just saved you a whole bunch of market research. There's your answer. Can't wait to see the posters. So Tony, thank you as always for joining me. Spring football is finally here. Should be a blast. Can't wait. And if you want to hear much more about spring football, of course, Kevin Noonan and I have been doing a positional preview, talking about kind of 5 questions for each of the different position groups. We'll finish up tomorrow with the quarterbacks. Tony and I have been doing a different kind of parallel series, looking at each of the position groups kind of in a different order, and also with some different questions we're asking and conversations we're having about those. So you can find all of those on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. Should be plenty of content as we just sort of outlined. There is a lot to talk about this spring. There's a lot to learn this spring, and can't wait to get started. So that'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.